Test. Does this work? Chris, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Ramona, Sandy, can you hear me? No. How about that? Now it's work. Good afternoon, everybody. I trust it's not raining outside yet, right? Okay. Starting to. Well, thankfully you're indoors. Friends at home, the live stream address is up here on the screen. There's also information about the Dignity Fund Coalition, how you can join and become a member of the Dignity Fund Coalition and become more active in your community. On the tables outside, Good afternoon and welcome to the Dignity Fund Coalition's continuing conversation with the mayor on topics of interest to older adults and people with disabilities. My name is Mark Burns. I'm the Executive Director of Homebridge and a member of the Dignity Fund Coalition. I want to welcome our live audience to Corrett Auditorium at the San Francisco Public Library, and also welcome all of you who are joining us today by live stream or who may be watching our live stream in post-production. Today we are offering accessibility to this event through American Sign Language interpretation live in the auditorium and also available windowed onto our live stream. We have simultaneous Spanish and Cantonese translation occurring, and we will be captioning the post-production version of the live stream, and it will be available starting on Monday on the Dignity Fund website as well as SF.gov TV's YouTube channel. If you want more information on the Dignity Fund, please go to our website, sfdignityfund.org. We are always welcoming new members who want to engage more deeply in community activity. The format today will be that I'm going to introduce the Dignity Fund co-chairs who will speak to you a few minutes about the Dignity Fund itself, its formation, Proposition I, and the future of the Dignity Fund Coalition. They will then be introducing you to Shireen McSpadden, the Executive Director of the Department of Aging and Adult Services, and Shireen will speak to you in more depth about the implementation of the Dignity Fund. Following that, I will be introducing you to our moderator for the day, Yomi Rong, who will then introduce Mayor London Breed, and they will have a extensive conversation on a set of questions that have been culled from the April 2018 Dignity Fund Coalition event with the mayoral candidates. We expect the mayor to arrive at 2 o'clock. We will be concluding the event no later than 2:45, so I'd ask that everybody in Corrett please try and stay in your seats so that we can not have heads floating through our live stream presentation, and so out of respect to the mayor and our moderator. There will be no live Q&A. Again, the questions do come from our materials that we collected. I am missing my prop, which is a gigantic stack of questions about this thick that we gathered back during the Herbst Theater Town Hall. I just want to say, not a short list, but a rather long list of thank yous, starting with the mayor and the mayor's staff who helped us put this together over the past many months, to Shireen, the Executive Director of DOS, and to Marie and Fiona, the co-chairs of the Dignity Fund Coalition. I'd also like to thank the Board of Supervisors and their aides, including, and congratulations to Supervisor and now Board President Norman Yee. Thank you for congratulations. We'd like to thank, obviously, all the city department heads and staff who have come today, including DOS Commissioners Michael Pappas and Martha, I'm going to get this wrong, right, Knudsen? I apologize if I did not have that correctly. Yeah. I forgot my paper that had my note on it, Martha. I apologize for that. Also, I'd like to thank the board and the staff of the Meta Fund who have been great supporters of our community and also are partially underwriting this event today. Our thanks to you. The Dignity Fund Coalition members who are also helping pay for this event today and helped organize this. And obviously to the event committee. If you're in the room and you're part of the event committee, would you raise your hand, please? And in particular, thanks to our event coordinator, Andrew Adams from Homebridge, who has really been the lifeblood of putting this organization, this event together. Yeah. Thanks to our friends and coworkers at the San Francisco Long-Term Care Coordinating Council, to the members of the Dignity Fund Oversight Advisory Committee for your volunteer efforts, to the many volunteers in the room who helped this event happen today, and most of all to you, our audience, and to those of you out on the live stream. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the co-chairs of the Dignity Fund Coalition, Marie Jobling and Fiona Hinsey.
Hi there. So I'm going to start by taking you on a short walk down memory lane. The Dignity Fund was the result of 2 years of very hard work, both to craft the charter amendment, to get support from the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and finally to place the measure on the November 2016 ballot as Proposition I. Again, we have to thank Supervisor Yee for his leadership in that process. And to all of you here today and who are listening through the live stream, who helped secure endorsements and help raise money for this campaign. The measure passed with 2/3 support here in San Francisco. And I want you to know that that means 246,000 people said yes. Yeah, not bad for our first campaign. So yes, we all deserve a round of applause for that. So many of you know this already, but the Dignity Fund is a charter amendment, and it does 3 things. First, it guarantees that additional funds be dedicated every year through the Department of Aging and Adult Services downturn. It's good, right? So that was $6 million in the very first year, and about $3 million a year for the next 19 years. It's worth noting that this is not a ceiling. Is that right? It's not a ceiling, but it's a floor. Thank you. I have to get this right here. And so that with continued budget advocacy with the mayor and the board, that fund has grown beyond that initial dedicated amount. And so we're very excited and pleased about that as well. And we want to continue to keep growing it over the coming years as the numbers of older adults, people with disabilities, and their hands-on caregivers grow. The other thing it does is it requires a robust and inclusive needs assessment and planning process to provide more services in a way that guarantees equity and to make sure that all of the city's diverse communities are served well. And thirdly, it creates an oversight and advisory committee to shepherd the process with the Department of Aging and Adult Services and assure that the community and service providers have a way to give input. Members of that group have worked very hard for the last 2 years, and we thank those in attendance and watching online for all of their dedicated service. So now with that, I want to turn it over to Fiona to tell you how the Dignity Fund Coalition is continuing to make an impact.
All right, so what we're doing right now is we're trying to make, oops, my mic is giving me some feedback, sorry about that. So our goal is to really maintain transparency in what can be a very complicated process that Marie described. So to do that, we maintain a website. You've heard it already several times today. I'm going to repeat it again. It's sfdignityfund.org. Through that website, you can sign up for our email list. We distribute information about events of note to our community and affecting seniors, but particularly Dignity Fund events such as our monthly meetings. You can email you can also subscribe to our email list via that website to get all of our information. We also, one of our main tasks going forward is going to be to increase the visibility of seniors and people with disabilities in public life and being civically engaged. So to do that, we're going to try to ensure that we get qualified seniors and people with disabilities to apply for commissions and boards throughout the city so that we can have a voice in not just issues that people think of typically as affecting seniors and people with disabilities, but all issues that are important to the city. So with that, it is now my honor to introduce Shireen McSpen, who's the Executive Director of Department of Aging and Adult Services, that has been a really key partner in the implementation of the Dignity Fund, and she will speak to you about the real implementation and sort of the nuts and bolts about the programs the fund has created in DOS and where the funding might go in the future. So Shireen, take it.
So thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Marie. It is really a pleasure to be up here today and to see many of my favorite faces out there. This is a great turnout. I just feel, I think I have to say before I get started talking about the department and talking about the Dignity Fund, that it is such a pleasure to work in San Francisco with all of you. I think San Francisco rocks, especially when we think, yeah, and we know this already, but I think when we think about people with disabilities and older people, you know, when I talk to my colleagues across the country and they're like, oh, we can't get any traction, nobody cares. Here we care, right? And whether we care at the same degree or not is sometimes what we argue about, but we're so fortunate that we have a board of supervisors, that we have a mayor, that we have leaders, that we have advocates, that we have the people who really started all of this, which is people with disabilities and older people who are willing to really sacrifice and fight for their rights. We're really fortunate to have all of that come together here. And I think the Dignity Fund is a really good example of that. So I just wanted to say that before I talk a little bit about the department and then about the Dignity Fund and what the department's doing with the Dignity Fund. So the reason I think I was asked by the Dignity Fund Coalition to talk a little bit about the department is because what we've realized in doing some of the work since the Dignity Fund was approved by the voters is we've realized that no matter how hard we try, sometimes people don't really understand what the department does or how to access services for older people and people with disabilities in San Francisco. So we're kind of trying to take every opportunity we can to say, hey, this is what the department does. So what the department does, the department is charged with planning for the needs of people with disabilities 18 and older, and older adults, which we sometimes define as 60 and sometimes define as 65. And we're charged with planning for the needs of that group of people and really thinking about how best to provide social services to that group of people, which of course is many different subgroups, right? So it gets complicated. Our department is about a $340 million department, and we have about 375 internal staff. But we do a lot of our work through community contracts, and a lot of you out there are representing those contracts or getting services from people who provide those contracts. So we definitely can't do it without our community partners. And so what we do externally through our community partners is we provide services such as case management and community services like senior centers and centers for people with disabilities. We provide transportation and legal services and naturalization services and meals, home-delivered meals, congregate meals, restaurant meals. We provide home-delivered groceries. We have a whole cadre of meals programs that we provide. And we do things very deliberately in the community by thinking about the different cultures of San Francisco and the different languages and the things that people need to really feel like they're getting the services that they would get from their own families, which of course is a big challenge, right? The other thing we do is we do a lot of services through our own staff, through our internal kind of city services staff. The biggest ones that we do are in-home supportive services, which is our biggest program, and of course that's a Medi-Cal program for people who need home care to stay safely at home. We also do adult protective services, which means we go out and investigate allegations of abuse and neglect and try to figure out if there's something we can do to get people into a better place if they're being victims of abuse or neglect. We also are the public administrator, guardian, and conservator. So if people can no longer take care of their own affairs, then we're able to step in and help. So the county, through this department, does a lot of different things that are very, very important. And it's a great place to work. And I think one of the things that we're so fortunate to have is just these different groups of people who come together, whether they're staff, whether they're consumers, whether they're leaders in other ways, to come together to really figure out how to do the best job we can. And I firmly believe that we have the best Department of Aging in the country. I really do believe that. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the Dignity Fund. The Dignity Fund is one of those things where I think, you know, it was like having this money fall into your lap was very exciting. And I think, you know, from a city perspective, set-asides are really, really tough because they take away the discretion of a city to really think about how to handle, you know, emergencies and things like that. That said, the other side of it is that when people come together to fight for something like this, it's pretty clear that people feel very strongly that there's a need. And so to be able to be involved working with the mayor's office and working with the Board of Supervisors and the Dignity Fund Coalition to really figure out how do we shape this so that everybody has a say in how it really happens was really, for me, a very gratifying and important task and important work. So we knew that there were certain things that we really needed to do, and in the legislation, the legislation basically says there are community groups we need to work with. So we work with the Oversight and Advisory Committee, and there's a service provider working group, and we're really working together to try to figure out how best to get this money out into the community so that every dollar is being used as wisely as possible, and that it's really making an impact. So we've had to do a lot of thinking about what that means. One of the things that fortunately, I should say that the legislation laid out a lot of this for us, because people were thinking, like, how are we going to do this responsibly? What is the best way to go about that? So one of the first things that we did as a department, and as I'm not going to keep saying who's working on this. It's just a group effort. So one of the first things we did was conduct a community needs assessment. So we went out and we talked to a number of people. We had a forum in each supervisor's district, and the supervisors were really great at working with us, asking people like, hey, what do you think about services for older people and people with disabilities? What would you like to see? What do you know about already that exists? And we got back a lot of feedback there. We also had 29 focus groups, really zeroing in on subpopulations that I kind of alluded to earlier. So, for instance, we had one that was Cantonese speaking. We had one that was just adults with disabilities. We had one that was for African American older adults. We had a group of homeless people. We had a veterans group. And so we really were starting to try to figure out, like, what is it that different groups in San Francisco need from this Dignity Fund? What would they like to see? And then we also just kind of looked at our own data and said, who are we serving right now and what's missing? Are there people we're not serving as well as we could be? Are there groups that we're missing out on? And so we kind of pulled together all that information, and that information is going to inform what we're now working on, which is called a service allocation plan. So in the legislation, it basically says we have a cycle. So we do our community needs assessment, we put together, we use that information to then figure out what our service allocation plan should look like, and that plan should carry us for the next 4 years, and then we start the whole cycle again. So we basically kind of modeled this on the Department of Children, Youth and Families Children's Fund, which has been operating for a lot longer. So we had them as a model to look at. So we are now in the throes of putting together our service allocation plan based on the community needs assessment. And so that's kind of just what we're working on right now. So I think one of the things that we really wanted to be able to do today also, and how much time do I have left? Nobody knows. Okay. So one of the things I want to talk about that's, to me, the most exciting is to really talk about how we've spent some of the money in Dignity Fund. And again, it's because many of you in the room are responsible for bringing that to us. We really use the information that we got. We know that there are communities that we don't quite serve as well as others, and that's one of the things that came out in the community needs assessment. For instance, we could do better serving people with disabilities who are under 60. And that's been kind of a structural problem in the department for many years, but the Dignity Fund allows us to address some of that. We know that we're not necessarily reaching Latino older adults as well as others, and we need to delve into that a little bit more and figure out what is causing that. Why are we not reaching particularly Spanish-speaking older adults as well? And so that's something we're working on. LGBT older adults, we know that we need to figure out a better way to serve people, not in the programs that are targeted for LGBT older adults, but really in our mainstream programs. Why do people sometimes feel not comfortable coming to them? You know, it's really, we've gotten some answers, and we've also have a lot more questions. And so we're going to continue trying to figure out, how do we answer those questions so that we are providing our services as equitably as possible throughout the city. There are also certain geographic areas that are tougher for us to serve because maybe there are not as many kind of big public sites as some of the other neighborhoods. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we get at that? How do we do a better job of serving those people? And then veterans. I mean, one of the things that we are charged with is serving veterans, and we want to make sure that we're being really equitable and that veterans feel very welcome using our services, no matter where those services are, but that we're also growing programs that are specifically for veterans. So we have a lot to do with the money that we have, and a lot of it was already, as I think Marie said, but basically what the Dignity Fund has protected some money that was already out in the community. So it gets challenging to figure out then, how do we break it out differently from the way we have been? But I think we've been doing a pretty good job of figuring it out. So one of the things that we did that was new, that came out of focus groups, is we've started doing some intergenerational programming, and we literally did we even go to commission with that yet? We haven't gone to commission with that yet, but we're just about to go into contract with a variety of organizations in San Francisco to provide intergenerational programming. And one of the things that people kept saying is, when you're thinking about older adults, and one of the biggest issues we're dealing with is social isolation, social engagement becomes very important. And one of the things that brings joy to people's lives is being able to interact with other people of different generations. And I know, at least for me as a child, being able to interact with older adults was extremely important. So I'm really excited that we're going to be going into contract for some of those intergenerational programs. Also, one of the things that came out of the initial needs assessment was that we need to do a better job of supporting caregivers. And so we've certainly put some more funding into caregiver support programs. We're also continuing to ask that question: what is the best way to support caregivers in San Francisco? Are there some things where we can support mass numbers of caregivers with, maybe from using technology? What can we do? We know respite's really important, but we also know it's very expensive. So we're looking at various ways that we can support caregivers. We've done some pilot innovative activities at community service centers. One of the things that we wanted to continue doing was engaging community with those community centers. Are we using the buildings that we have as effectively as we can? So, for instance, we were thinking sometimes, we have older adults who are still working. They're not going to go to a senior center during the day, but that doesn't mean they don't need social engagement, right? And so some of our, more traditional, what used to be traditional senior centers that would close at like 3 or 4 are now open at night, and they're doing different kinds of programming to try to bring in people at night and bring in people on the weekends and really cater to the communities in which they operate. And then I mentioned veterans earlier, but we started doing more service connection for veterans. And we've also really thought about how to expand and have expanded congregate meals for veterans. So again, that's a big priority for us, and we will continue to figure out how to serve veterans as well as we can. We've also, again, I mentioned disabilities. So the 2 things that we're looking at right now, one of them is really, we're working with the Longmore Institute. I see you guys are right there. We're working with the Longmore Institute to look into what it would take to develop a specific disability center. One of the things, like the community centers we have that are really focused on seniors, don't quite do it sometimes for people with disabilities. There's disability culture that doesn't get taken into the context of the community center, but also there's a different information referral and assistance need for people with disabilities. And so we're really looking at the best way to set that up and to make sure that people with disabilities are accessing services at the rate that they need to, and that they know, what's available in San Francisco. But also, we're also just thinking about how to celebrate disability culture through that. So we're in the process of looking at that right now. The other thing is, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, but our name, Department of Aging and Adult Services, does not speak to the fact that we also work with veterans and we work with people with disabilities. It kind of just doesn't say it, and that's what we continually hear from the community. So as our agency, Human Services Agency, is in the process of rebranding right now, we're really thinking about the name of the department and what would be more fitting. And so we're working with the community. We'll be going around and testing some names and some taglines and things like that. So I'm excited about that because I've heard very consistently for many, many years that the department really doesn't speak to people. And one of the things we want to make sure of is that people in San Francisco know where to go to access the services. And then we've just been providing services in new ways to new populations. We have, started thinking about things that maybe where we're really using outcomes and using evidence-based processes to figure out how to fund things. And so one example is nutrition as medicine. We know that there have been some studies that show that chronically ill people, when given the right kind of nutrition plan and diet, do a better job. They sometimes can reverse some of that disease and that chronic illness. So we're looking at that model. Looking at technology at home services because we know that more and more people need to rely on technology. We've done a lot of work on bridging the digital divide in partnership with the Tech Council and some other folks. And then we're really looking, again, to promote programs work on programs that promote socialization and wellness. And I mentioned social engagement is such a huge thing. And the more we know about what isolation does and how it kills people or how it makes them sick, the more we're focused on social engagement programs. One of the programs that I love, I know staff probably get tired of hearing about it, but it's the Community Choirs program. And that's because when you think about bringing people together and the joy that music brings and the breathing and the memorization and all of those things, and think about what actually kind of an inexpensive intervention it is, but such a great intervention, you realize that those are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking more of. I mean, one in four people in San Francisco is an older adult. Well, actually more than 1 in 4. It's a little more than 1 in 4, is an older adult or adult with disabilities. We need to think about some of these interventions that aren't super costly, that we're working with people upstream so that we keep them healthier and so that fewer and fewer people need some of those downstream, very expensive services. But again, we're responsible as a department for providing the whole gamut of services upstream and then really for people who need much more comprehensive services. So those are some of the things that we're doing with the Dignity Fund dollars right now. And I think, we're going to continue working with the 4 community-based services as people start thinking more about addressing the social determinants of health early on. We might have some opportunities to leverage Dignity Fund dollars to really draw down some of those dollars. So it's really exciting. It's an exciting time for me to be the director here. And I, again, just want to thank all of you for your role in making lives of seniors and people with disabilities as great as they can be in San Francisco. So thank you.
Thank you, Shireen. On behalf of the Dignity Fund Coalition, we appreciate the deep stewardship that the Department of Aging and Adult Services is showing to the Dignity Fund, and we look forward to many long years of collaboration with you on this. It's my pleasure next to introduce you to today's moderator. I'm sorry. Before I do that, I realized that I forgot to make one of the largest thank yous during my thank you section, and that is to Michael Lambert and the staff here at the San Francisco Public Library. Thank you. We're appreciative to the breadth of staff and the folks at SF TV, I should also point out, thank you, who've been very helpful in putting together today's live stream. It really takes a village to put one of these events together. It's lovely to have such a wonderful space and so many dedicated people to work on this project. So thanks to all of you for your work on this. So, Yomi Rong is an Oakland-based disability rights advocate known to many of us for her role as executive director of the Center for Independent Living in Berkeley, a landmark organization committed to advancing the disability rights at the local, state, and national level. These days, Yomi works as ADA compliance manager for Sutter Health, ensuring that people with disabilities or functional needs have equal access to high-quality medical care. She also happens to be an exceptional, experienced journalist whose column on traveling with a disability, called All Systems Go, is published monthly in the Los Angeles Times travel section. Yomi offers her time, talent, and resources to movements and causes she cares deeply about. She is formerly a board member of my organization, Homebridge, and currently she serves on the board of directors for the ACLU of Northern California, and also represents that affiliate on the ACLU's National Board of Directors. It's my pleasure to call Yomi Rong a personal friend. I love her deeply, and I'm sure that you all enjoy having her as the moderator for this event. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Yomi Rong.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? In the back, wave if you can hear me. All right, it's nice to see everybody. Give me 1 second to... Oh, there we go. All right. And get my technology working. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out in the rain. I know that for many of us, myself included, it is not easy to travel in wet weather, especially across the bridge. So I appreciate that all of you came and made... Can't hear me? Okay, I will try very hard not to do that. That's going to be hard for me. Okay, I'm an expressive talker, so I do a lot of stuff with my hands and I move my head around. I'm going to try very hard to make sure that you can hear me. Okay, so thank you, Mark, for the introduction. I appreciate it. It is such an honor for me to be invited back by the Dignity Fund Coalition to serve as your moderator. I just want to get us started by inviting our guest of honor to join me. Please extend a warm, enthusiastic welcome for Mayor London Breed. You comfortable?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
So I was just told that when I move my head, they can't hear me in the back. So hopefully your mic is...
Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Mayor Reed, we are delighted to have you back. So nice to see you again, and congratulations.
Thank you.
It's been exactly 6 months to the day of your inauguration. That's what I was told.
Wow.
Yeah.
6 months feel like years
I
in
was
San
gonna
Francisco
say.
time.
In dog years, that's like how long? And I know you've wasted no time implementing a number of initiatives. For today, we want to just focus on some of the commitments you made to older adults and people with disabilities. All of the questions round back to themes from our town hall discussion. Yes. So no surprises, just a continuation of that great conversation. All right. So before we get started with the questions, I believe you had some opening remarks.
Yes, I just want to say thank you to the Dignity Fund for having me here today. It's great to have an advocacy group that is focused on fighting for seniors and those with disabilities. I actually grew up in San Francisco and was raised by my grandmother, and it was really challenging once she started to need care. She had dementia, and I didn't understand in my 20s how to navigate the systems, and in fact, she struggled with walking, and there was a lot of frustration that I experienced trying to maneuver in the city with trying to get her the help and the support that she needed. And so this is something that's really important to me, making sure that some of our most members of our most vulnerable communities are not forgotten, and that we as a city think about how we make decisions, both our policy decisions, how we allocate our resources, and how we continue to work together to make the lives of our senior and disabled community a lot better than it has been, because I know that it can be quite challenging from personal experience. And so I'm really honored to serve as your mayor and honored to work with you as a partner and making sure that we're making the right investments, and those investments are touching the lives of the people that you continue to advocate for. We know that San Francisco has a number of challenges in general with homelessness and building more housing and making sure those housing units are accessible so people can age in place with dignity, which is what I know this is all about too. And we will continue to, I think, address those challenges by working together and making the right decisions. And I am so looking forward to continuing that relationship. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all so much for having me here today.
So we know you're very busy today. You have limited time with us, about 40 minutes or so, and we want to make the most of your time, so we budgeted about 5 minutes for each question. Okay. And we have a timekeeper sitting right there. She's gonna, yes, I need that.
You guys know I talk a lot.
Right. So we'll do our best to stay on track and pay
right.
attention to the timekeeper. So we're going to talk about various themes that we've already talked about. You talked about it during your campaign, and we talked about it at the town hall. The first being, and I should also say that all of these questions and all of these issues were generated from your community, from older adults and people with disabilities that live in San Francisco. So all of these questions come from all of you. Okay. So the first topic is housing security and access. At the town hall, you made several commitments as regards housing. I've got about 4 of them listed here. One of them was to implement a right to civil counsel, the law providing legal support to tenants facing eviction, purchase more rent-controlled buildings, protect existing affordable housing from being converted to market rate, and expand rental subsidy programs for older adults and adults with disabilities. So I have kind of a multi-part questions. If you could talk to us about any steps you've taken to fulfill those commitments, what actions you have taken or plan to take to keep older adults and adults with disabilities housed in the city, and let us in on any challenges you're facing addressing those issues.
So the good news is that we've been able to almost immediately fully fund right to civil counsel so that tenants facing eviction will have representation when they're going through that process. So I'm really excited and proud of that work. We also have moved forward on allocating funding for small site acquisitions so that we can purchase more buildings where we know there are a lot of people who are facing the possibility of eviction to prevent them from being targets, and purchasing those buildings will give us an opportunity to protect them and keep them affordable for years to come. In fact, the recent windfall that you all heard about is something in that budget where I'm proposing to purchase even more buildings that have a lot of low-income residents, including seniors and those with disabilities. And so that is a program I will continue to fight for and fund. In terms of housing, and I want to make sure I didn't miss the other two.
It was protecting existing affordable housing
Yes.
for being converted to market rate?
Yes. So part of that includes small site acquisitions and purchasing those buildings. The other part of it also includes rehabilitation of some buildings that are unfortunately under threat of being lost to the community. A number of places in our portfolio that there are buildings that are in disrepair and in need of some additional assistance, not only to rehabilitate those units, but to ensure HUD that they are in a state of good repair so that they don't come in and try and take over, and eventually that could be problematic for us as well. So we are well on our way in terms of preserving and protecting existing affordable housing stock, which has to be just as equally important as we develop new affordable housing. Keeping people housed is what we have to focus our attentions on, and allocating resources both in this past budget as well as the new windfall will help us address some of those issues.
Right. And then the fourth one was about expanding rental subsidy
Yes.
programs.
And we did that in this past budget. We have expanded rental subsidies, and as you know, as we increase the amount of money that we're able to provide in terms of rental subsidies, that money gets taken so fast. Every year we have increased those dollars, and it just gets swept up right away, which makes it clear that there is definitely a need for more. The rapid rehousing vouchers, we were able to increase those dollar amounts, and that is, so for example, because sometimes people come to us when it's too late, when they've already been evicted and they end up homeless. And that's also a great opportunity for us to immediately try and get them back into housing, and so increasing the vouchers that we provide for rapid rehousing for those, unfortunately, who have already been evicted is a program where we've been able to increase funding.
Yeah. So speaking on the same thing of housing, but also homelessness. Typically, topics of housing and homelessness are typically intermingled, but your answer doesn't need to be. Tell us what you're doing to combat homelessness and the lack of housing, especially as experienced by older adults and adults with disabilities. We're hoping to specifically hear from you on two of your goals that you made at the Dignity Fund Town Hall: advancing a $50 million bond for modular housing for homeless, and building at least 5,000 units per year.
So the good news is, first of all, I'm not going to need to do a modular housing bond. We've been able to identify capacity within some of our existing resources in order to dedicate $100 million to modular housing. And what I'm so, and the reason why this is exciting, because one of the things that I've been pushing for is to look at building a modular housing factory in San Francisco. So this is really a down payment, a commitment to a new modular housing facility to ensure its success. One of the most recent proposals, again, in the windfall of money that we receive, that I'm pushing for, there's a project that is on hold and is missing a certain amount of money that will get this project done. It's 258 units of housing, which will be built as modular housing, one of the first major modular housing projects in San Francisco. And so we're filling in that, hopefully, that gap funding that's going to help get that developed. And so that's 258 units of housing for single adults, including seniors and those with disabilities. And so I am committed to that goal. And in fact, we're going to exceed that goal. And the good news is we're not necessarily going to have to go to the voters for modular housing funding, but we will be going to the voters hopefully soon for affordable housing in general. Most recently in the capital plan for the City and County of San Francisco, which is the plan that the city develops in order to put forth bond measures that help to protect the city's assets, like our fire stations, our police stations, our libraries, and our places and our buildings and assets. Typically, it has never included any housing. And so what I thought was important, because again, one of our biggest challenges as a city that we face is housing people in general, especially the amount of money that we don't have for affordable housing. So this is another creative tool to provide affordable housing. And so I will be bringing forth a $300 million housing bond that will be used specifically for affordable housing, period. So I'm really excited about that. And I wanted to also, there was something else that you mentioned on there too, the 5,000 units. We just hired a housing delivery director, someone who will assist us in getting housing projects developed faster, because the city, we are our own worst enemy when it comes to bureaucracy. You know, we want more housing. We want to make sure that people have a safe, affordable place to call home, but yet we can't produce housing fast enough because of the planning department and the Department of Building Inspection and the fire department and all of these codes. I mean, when you think about it, just recently, I put out a directive for accessory dwelling units, which can, in most cases, since they're at the bottom of homes, they can be accessible. A lot of times, you know, we call them in-laws because sometimes you move your family members and your parents in particular into those spaces. And it was taking like almost 2 years for someone to be able to get the appropriate permits in order to reconstruct and make their accessory dwelling unit legal. So I put out an executive directive to say, no, we're going to cut back on the bureaucracy, and you have to clear the existing backlog of 900 units within the next 6 months, and any units moving forward need to be done within 4 months with these city departments. because there can't be any excuse for bringing forth new housing. So in terms of my goal of meeting that, it involves getting rid of layers of bureaucracy and being more creative about housing production in general in San Francisco. It won't be easy because, you know, the truth is we have a board of supervisors who introduces legislation on a regular basis, and sometimes there's unintended consequences to many of the policies that they put forward, which add additional layers of bureaucracy that make it difficult to build more housing. So I am going to try and work with members of the board and our city departments to try and really cut back on some of these requirements that make things a lot more difficult, which is going to help us get to the goal of making sure that we're able to, at a minimum, provide 5,000 new units of housing in San Francisco each year.
So everybody in this room and participating via the live stream, our entire community of older adults and people with disabilities, you know, having access to safe, affordable, accessible housing is one of our key issues. It's one of our top issues. And, you know, I believe in advocacy and organizing, and I also believe that we need a seat at the table. And so advocacy is the next theme that I want to talk about. As older adults and people with disabilities, a constituency making up more than a third of San Francisco's voting population, so a very important constituency, we would like to see stronger representation at the highest levels of city government. What are your thoughts on creating a stronger voice for policy and action for our community in your office?
Well, just apply. Reach out to my office. We have actually 4 vacancies on our Disability Council. We have other vacancies on commissions in general in San Francisco. The commissions that you can serve on, they don't necessarily have to be specifically directly related to the things that we're talking about today. We have the Public Health Commission, we have the Fire Commission, we have the Airport Commission. We have a lot of commissions and boards in San Francisco where having a seat at the table is definitely important to addressing some of the challenges that you face. Perfect example, when I served on the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency Commission, and there was a housing project that came before us that was townhomes. I fought against it, not because I didn't want the housing, but because, again, from my personal experience of dealing with my grandmother and just the challenges that we faced with stairs and how it was really hard, I just said townhomes are just not accessible. You know, people can't necessarily age in place in townhomes. So what are we going to do to make changes so that, you know, when people move into these places, they're able to age in place and they're able to get around in their own home. So part of what is important is reaching out to my office, making recommendations to my office around boards and commissions and committees and other things that exist where you can make an impact. So I'm definitely open to working with you on that.
I've served on boards and commissions, and some are more effective than others.
Yes, that's true.
The difference I've seen where there's a positive difference is when there is a direct line to the mayor. And so what about the idea of creating a position in your administration as a liaison between your office and this community?
So there will be, as soon as I'm able to hire someone in my legislative office, Andres, who is here today, is the director of our legislative, I forget what the position is. Thank you. He's my policy director. And his job is to hire a number of people who have specific focuses on different populations with different things, including transportation, including senior and disability community. And so there will be someone in our office that will be a direct connection to the community.
Yeah. So another question about employment and income inequality. You've talked to us about one of your priorities to invest and leverage private funding for workforce initiatives specifically targeted toward increasing opportunities for older adults and adults with disabilities. So what programs have you begun, or what do you have in the works?
So I'm actually really excited about what we're doing with a program called Opportunities for All. It's specifically targeted at young people in high school. I got my first opportunity because someone believed in me and supported me and hired me and took a chance on me and taught me what I needed to do to be a part of the workforce. And Opportunities for All is making sure that we are thinking about the future and the next generation of young people and preparing them for all the opportunities that exist in San Francisco, from government to tech to anything, you name it. And these are paid internships for kids, and we have been able to leverage private dollars and also the private sector and public sector to provide opportunities. We are going to be working again to try and look at the similar ways in which we can work with our senior and disabled community. And in fact, my workforce director, Josh Arce, is here today as well, because there are so many incredible opportunities. And we were just talking about there's always something for anyone to do if they basically, depending on what you want to do. And so making the connections between what someone can do and is interested in doing and what's available is something that's important for our Office of Workforce Development to do. We have these places called success centers where you can come and you can get assistance and look for job opportunities in various fields. And again, Josh will be here afterwards, and if there is any interest, we'd love to maybe even host a job fair where we can invite people in who are interested in working in various opportunities. So the doors are open to continuing to work. We have a 2.3% unemployment rate in San Francisco, and that's something to celebrate, but there's still challenges with our African American population. There's still challenges with our senior and disabled community, and so we want to break those barriers and open the doors of opportunities to employment for all San Franciscans, and we are excited about that and looking forward to it.
Speaking of workforce, we've discussed challenges to sustain a long-term care workforce, especially when the housing crisis that we face in San Francisco. Are you considering creating housing opportunities that are specific for long-term care workers in order to better support their availability to live in the city?
So I think what I am most dedicated to is create more housing opportunities, period. Because you have those who are long-term care workers who need housing, you have teachers who need housing, you have people from all spectrums of employment that need housing. And so we have to create more opportunities. One of the things that I'm most concerned about when it comes to those individuals who care for persons with disabilities and seniors is, the challenge we have sometimes, especially in affordable housing, is they may live with the person and they may assist the person, and then maybe the person passes away or they end up maybe in a long-term care facility, and that person has no place to live. That person is out of luck because they're not on the lease. And so part of what I want to do is make some changes to our policies around affordable housing so that they can be protected. So that even if, for example, they're in a 2-bedroom, then if we could basically allow them to continue in that location until we're able to identify a 1-bedroom for that person, that's a more humane way of doing it rather than saying, okay, you're out of luck because the person you cared for is no longer here. So I think we have to make some changes like that. And we also have to think about how are we going to increase the size of somebody's place when they need a live-in or a person to care for them. And so I want to look at how are we going to be able to change policies to account for so many people who are caring for folks who are basically living with them in some instances. How are we going to make our policies work better to protect them as well?
You've done a great job already to support increasing the minimum wage for nonprofit and IHSS workers, so thank you for that. That's a very big deal. It's a big deal. But I think, these wages are still far off from a livable wage for someone to be able to sustain themselves in a city as expensive as San Francisco. Do you see continued support for advancing the wages of long-term care workforce?
Definitely. It's really challenging because part of the issue is the state is gradually, well, no, aggressively removing their support that they've provided in the past for IHSS workers, and the city has continuously absorbed the cost in order to make sure that many of the folks who are, in some instances, family members who care for their aging parents or what have you, that they have the support that they need to do so. And what we have done in San Francisco is taken the responsibility, and in fact, you know, the responsibility, the financial responsibility for the city has more than doubled in terms of what we anticipated because of the drastic increase in support from the state. But it's still a really low wage. It's a big expense for the city. In fact, it's one of my single largest commitments in the budget that I've made coming on board as mayor, and it had everything to do with the belief that it's really important. But sadly, as expensive as it is, you know, it's still a really low wage for so many of our IHSS workers who do, you know, really amazing work in caring for so many people who need support and need help. And so I'm committed to continuing to make sure that we are trying to work to help support IHSS workers as they do this work. I see Kelly Dearman here, who manages the program for the IHSS workers, and thank you for your work and your commitment to continuing to work with our office in order to provide the support necessary to support IHSS workers. It is going to continue to be a challenge, but it's one that I'm committed to working through.
The last time we were together, you were talking about, you were recognizing that access to technology is an important tool to reduce social isolation among older adults and adults with disabilities. So fill us in on any programs or ideas that you have in the planning to address this priority.
Okay, I haven't gotten to that yet.
That is so real. Thank
okay,
you.
It's been 6 months. That's one that I haven't, I forgot I even said it. You know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But thanks for reminding me.
Okay.
So we'll get on that right away.
We'll circle back to you in another 6 months or so and see how you're doing there.
Andres is here taking notes, so we'll get on that right away.
I'm sorry.
But I will talk about.
And I said there were going to be no surprises. So.
Yeah, but I will tell you, I will talk about, you know, just some things. I want us to get more creative. Like most recently, I had a meeting with a school board member who talked about absenteeism and some challenges with, you know, reaching out to families or parents and not having enough people to help make those phone calls. And I thought, you know, we have what a great opportunity to work with folks in our senior community, especially people who are retired who could come and would be happy to make those phone calls to say, hey, your child was absent today. We want to make sure you know that your child was absent today, and helping us track the data so that we can start addressing those sorts of issues. And so that's just one example, but part of addressing issues around, you know, making sure that our seniors are not, you know, living in isolation is connecting them to opportunities that are going to be meaningful, that are going to be helpful. And so not just necessarily technology, because half the technology tools that exist, I don't know how to use it myself, but just really working together to try and create ways in which, you know, we can really open the doors to work with you to provide these opportunities where, you know, it could be helpful, helpful to both sides.
Thank you, and thank you for that honesty. That was refreshing. I like that. Wasn't that refreshing? Okay. So along this theme of isolation, so staying connected to community is really important. And for many of us, staying connected to community means living in community and not being forced into institutions. So you've talked before about developing a strategy for universal long-term care in San Francisco. Right, we've got fans there. So can you tell us what is being done to advance a vision for universal long-term care that makes it affordable and accessible, allowing city residents to age in place with dignity and quality of life?
Yeah, and one of the first things that I was so proud to do when I found just a little bit of money when I first started as mayor is to provide financial support to a few long-term care facilities that were possibly going to close, which meant those almost 100 people would not have had a place to go. And so we actually helped to cover the gap funding necessary to keep those places open and keep those people housed in places where they were being cared for. And so we do need a long-term strategy. And again, I keep going back to just what I experienced with my grandmother. I mean, it was a really tough time in trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. And trying to maneuver through the city bureaucracy was so very difficult. Just imagine if my grandmother didn't have me. Just imagine those people who may not have a family member who could help facilitate. I mean, she had dementia, so she was forgetting things. She didn't fill out applications. She didn't return. I mean, she wasn't paying her bills. There were all these things that were happening, and because I was able to step in, I was able to help. But it was even stressful for me as a person trying to help facilitate through all of this process. And eventually, I had, we took care of her for years, and then was able to get her into Laguna Honda after a long wait list. I just think about the fact that we have to develop the right strategy for how we're able to care for people, whether or not they have family members who are caring for them, whether it's in their place where they live, and we're able to provide support through IHSS or social workers or other things. And also there's programs also with the Aging and Adult Services where we could have people brought into different places to interact and engage with people and be picked up and taken home. So some of you might be familiar with some of those programs. But I do think that making sure that we have social workers who are visiting people in the home, who are identifying the challenges that they face, and then making recommendations. Because the other thing, and I hope you don't take offense to this, but a lot of older people are really stubborn and stuck in their ways. My grandmother, she gave me the blues. I gave her the blues too, but that was when I was a kid. But she gave me the blues because she didn't want to do certain things. And to get to a better place, it took a lot of work. It wasn't just me. It was like, getting other people in to have conversations with her. And so part of what we have to do as a city with our social workers is they have to go and develop relationships with the people that they're helping. And that takes time because you can't just show up when there's a problem. You have to consistently show up so that they trust and believe you, especially when the time comes and there might be a need to either help them through the process within their existing home or help them into a facility. Basically having someone that you trust is going to be important to that sort of transition, especially, again, if you bring something into somebody's home and you're like, well, we need to put this ramp in your living room. Well, why do I need a ramp in my living room? I don't want to some of you might know what I'm talking about. I don't want a ramp in my living room. And it's just like, well, you need this ramp in order to, what is in my way? I can't see my TV, I dealt with it all, and it is really challenging, but we need people who are compassionate people who care about serving and supporting this community and who's willing to make recommendations that don't just make it, okay, well, let's just put this person here or let's just do this. Let's focus on who this person is and how are we going to make sure that they can have a good life in their home where they're comfortable. That's the first step. And if it gets to that point, we could talk about that, but ultimately I think it's going to be important for us to develop, just really a plan that's going to help us address this issue. And then also with the additional funding we anticipate as a result of the Dignity Fund, we're hoping that resources would be available to helping to prepare the plan and also implement the plan, because it will be quite costly to implement.
We are just about at time. I have one more question for you, and then we're going to leave just a minute or two to take a picture with you.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Let's get your photo. So, speaking on the issue of trust, we're going to talk about conservatorship to close out our forum. A lot of work and discussion has taken place around conservatorship, including the passage of SB 1045. How do you see that as different from the current conservatorship in the city? And would you share with us your best current thinking on the scope of this program as it will be implemented, and what you are doing to prepare the city to provide care in the most appropriate, least restrictive setting?
Yes. So the difference with, and what SB 1045 does, it gives us another tool. So based on, the laws that exist, it's difficult to try and, like someone who has a substance abuse disorder brought on, a psychosis brought on by substance use disorder, that's been the biggest challenging population that we've had. Like you all see people who are out on the streets and you're like, why isn't the city doing something? And then they're either arrested or they're taken to San Francisco General, and then a day or two later they're right back in the same location, clearly in need of help and support. And so SB 1045 really focuses on this particular population, and what it does is, allows us to push to provide a conservator that is a guardian for someone who can't make decisions for themselves. And in some instances, we have mental health stabilization beds where, the goal is to try and get them help and to get them healthy. And separately from that, we do have situations where, like, again, I keep going back to my grandmother, she had dementia and making decisions. I mean, thank goodness I did this paperwork with her doctor, who started to notice it, so that me and my aunt were able to make decisions for her. But some people are in situations where there isn't anyone designated to make a decision for them. And I think this is not about being restrictive. This is about trying to get people the help and the support they need. But there are, some people that are more challenging than others. And they don't necessarily always belong in a jail cell. They belong in a hospital. And sometimes, in that particular setting, sometimes those facilities, are locked facilities with certain rooms to accommodate those things. So it's a very complex situation. And mental health is something that we need to start talking about more, because there are different levels to mental health. There's people with dementia, there's people with schizophrenia, there's people who are struggling from all different layers. How are we going to start shifting the conversation and having really an honest conversation about people who are struggling and getting them the help and the support that they need? That's really why I supported this particular legislation. And in fact, through my proposed budget, we are adding more mental health stabilization beds. We are adding more than we ever have before. We need them. We can't just say, well, we want people have rights, or we don't want to see someone, rights taken away, and then we wonder.
Saying that, because that's a concern.
Yeah, so for me, it's really about being helpful and trying to get people healthy and providing them with the resources they need. And we got to be able to make the hard decisions to do that. And I am tired of seeing, people who are mentally ill, who need help. I'm tired of seeing them in the jails. I'm tired of seeing them in the jails, and I want to get them the help and the support that they need. So it's a complex problem. I'm actually in the process of hiring a new public health director. The public health directors, whoever is chosen, they have to start thinking about, mental health and how we're going to address the challenges that exist in our society from a broad perspective of those struggling with either depression or dementia or any layer of challenges that exist. And so that is something that I'm definitely committed to.
Before we wrap up, I would like to thank Mayor Breed. Thank you so much for coming back to talk to us and our other presenters. I'd like to thank the Board of Supervisors, representatives that are here. Wave, Board of Soups. Anybody here? Okay, all right, some people are here. City department heads who are here today, along with the mayor's staff, the Dignity Fund and its members, the Meta Fund for partially funding this event, and all of you, the audience, both here and on the live stream. Thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us. Would you like to have the last word?
Yeah, I just want to say again, that time went by so fast.
It flew by.
But again, you know, I can't do this job alone. This is about a partnership. I represent you, and part of how we're able to deliver with some of the things that are going to make the lives of all of us better here in our city is just really hearing from you and getting actively engaged. Like today is a perfect forum to have this very open and honest discussion, you know, about what I know the challenges are that we face. I mean, it comes from experience for me as it relates to my grandmother, but eventually, you know, I'm going to become a senior citizen, and the fact is, I want San Francisco to be easier for me to, you know, maneuver in because it's very challenging, and I think back all the time to like if my grandmother didn't have me, what would happen? And we see it playing itself out sometimes on our streets where you see senior citizens, people who can't care for themselves, who need us to do a better job for them. So the proposals that I make as mayor will be about trying to address many of these challenges. And like conservatorship, they may appear to be harsh. It's not about being harsh. It's about, if that were me, I'd want someone to do something different. I want someone to do something more than what we are doing right now as a city. And so I'm committed to, you know, working with all of you in order to address many of these challenges. I hope eventually we get to a better place where we don't see anyone on our streets who's homeless, where we are able to care for the people who cared for us all our lives. We can do better as a city. We will do better, and I want to thank all of you for having me here today.
Thank you. Everyone, please get home safely, traveling in the rain. Thank you.